a left brain interpreter. So which one did you choose, local or global? For some of us, this is a pretty difficult choice. I mean, they both seem to have their own problems. As we suggested earlier, maybe a middle position is the way to go. In Class B, we hinted that it could have something to do with metacognition. We'll develop this idea further in a little bit. But historically speaking, there are actually other positions that live in between the global and local extremes. Decades ago, when patients suffered from drug-resistant epilepsy, their corpus callosum was sometimes surgically severed. The corpus callosum consists of most of the white matter tracts connecting the two hemispheres. Remember that an epileptic seizure is essentially uncontrolled synchronous firing throughout the whole brain, but it usually starts in one small region. Now, instead of locating the point of origin and precisely taking out that bit of brain, one can also just stop the two hemispheres from talking to one another, thus stopping the spread of synchronous activity. This type of surgery is considered to be somewhat crude these days and is rarely done anymore. But they did help contain the seizures. The trouble was that patients tended to suffer from other deficits as a result of the treatment. In some dramatic cases, it was reported that these split-brain patients could show highly conflicted behavior. The right hand might have tried to attack a person while the other hand tried to stop it. But this is rare. Even without the corpus callosum, there are other ways for the two hemispheres to communicate and to resolve these conflicts before they come out behaviorally. But in experiments, we can specifically target one hemisphere at a time by briefly presenting information to just one half of the visual field. In one striking experiment on split-brain patient PS, the patient was asked to pick an object that would go with a certain image. That is, the chosen object had to be meaningfully related to what he saw. In the left visual field, he was presented with a snowy scene. This information went to the right hemisphere. In the right visual field, there was a chicken claw, and that information went to the left hemisphere. Both hemispheres seemed able to do the task. The right hand, controlled by the left hemisphere that saw the chicken claw, picked a card with a chicken on it. The left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere that saw the snowy scene, chose a shovel. But here's the truly remarkable thing. When PS was asked why he made those choices, he was only conscious of the chicken claw image. He said something along the lines of, well, the chicken was related to the chicken claw, obviously, and we needed a shovel to clean up the chicken shit. So basically, while it seems obvious to us that his right hemisphere picked up the shovel because of the snow, that hemisphere seemed unable to provide a conscious explanation. The idea here is that language functions are lateralized to the left hemisphere. So in split brains, the right hemisphere might not be able to tell its own story. This discovery led to the idea that consciousness could be something like an interpreter mechanism that's located in the left hemisphere. Much of how we act is driven by unconscious processes within each hemisphere, but this interpreter tries to make sense of what happens. It attempts to make a coherent narrative about ourselves, often after the fact. This idea is pretty compatible with Wagner's notion that the conscious will is also an illusion. Joe Ledoux conducted some of these experiments on split-brain patients when he was a grad student at Michael Gazzaniga's lab. Gazzaniga coined the term cognitive neuroscience and did much of the groundwork to allow the field to flourish. Remember that we also mentioned Ledoux back in Class 4. In fact, part of the reason why he thinks that amygdala activity alone isn't enough for consciousness is related to these studies on split-brain patients. These studies suggest that consciousness may depend on higher cortical processing at the level on which language and conceptual reasoning takes place. So according to Ledoux, amygdala activity just reflects unconscious processes in response to a threat.